The desert outside, Los Cruces, is quiet in the early morning. No traffic, no voices, just wind moving across dry earth and abandoned ground near an old landfill. On August 31st, 2003, that silence was broken by a single, horrifying discovery. A local resident driving near the remote dump site noticed something unusual lying in the dirt. At first glance, it didn't look real, but as he moved closer, the shape became unmistakable. It was the body of a young woman. She was lying face down, partially nude, her lower body exposed. There was no identification, no purse, no phone, no sign of who she was, only the brutal evidence that she had fought desperately before she died. Investigators arrived quickly. The scene told a story, but not a simple one. There were scrape marks on her arms, defensive wounds on her hands. Under her fingernails, detectives would later find something critical: skin and blood that did not belong to her. The killer had left his DNA behind. There were marks around her neck, signs of strangulation. And then there were the burns. Parts of her back and arm had been scorched, as if someone had poured a flammable liquid over her and tried to set her on fire. The flames hadn't fully consumed her body. The attempt had failed, but the intention was clear. This was not an accident. This was not random. There were no signs of a struggle at the dump site itself. The ground around her was undisturbed. That meant one chilling thing. She had been killed somewhere else. And brought here. At that moment, police didn't know her name. They estimated she was between 21 and 23 years old. Young, strong, someone who had fought for her life until the very end. What they didn't know yet was that only hours earlier she had been celebrating Labor Day weekend with friends, laughing, drinking, making plans for the future. Her name was Katie Sepich. And between a house party and this desert wasteland, something unspeakable had happened. The question that would haunt investigators for years was simple. What happened to Katie on the walk home? Just hours before her body was found in the desert, Katie Sepich was exactly where a 22-year-old with her whole life ahead of her should have been, surrounded by friends, laughing, celebrating Labor Day weekend. Katie wasn't reckless, she wasn't troubled, she was focused. She had grown up in Carlsbad, New Mexico, the eldest of 3 siblings. Her mother described her as straightforward, lively, and intelligent, the kind of daughter who called home every single day, sometimes more than once. Family wasn't just important to Katie, it was routine. She graduated from New Mexico State University with a degree in business. That fall, she was planning to begin her MBA program. She waited tables at a local Mexican restaurant, balancing long shifts with long-term goals. Everyone who knew her described the same qualities: cheerful, outgoing, driven. But there was something else in her life that made that summer feel even brighter. Joe Bischoff. They had met in college. What started as friendship slowly deepened into something serious. Katie told her mother she believed Joe was the one. They had even started talking casually, excitedly, about wedding plans. It may have been premature, but to Katie it felt real. Joe had recently moved back to his hometown to work in his family's business. So when he returned to Los Cruces that Labor Day weekend, Katie was thrilled. Friends gathered to see him. The night felt special. There was bar hopping, music, a house party filled with nearly 40 people. Katie wore the ring Joe had given her, a symbol of what she believed was her future. It was supposed to be a happy reunion. But sometime after midnight, something shifted. Katie saw something she didn't expect. An argument followed. And then she walked away. Alone. This is exactly why we tell stories like this on Unheard Confessions. Because behind every headline is a real person with plans, love, and a future that should have unfolded differently. Katie left the party without her purse, without her phone, without her keys. The walk home was only about a mile. She never made it inside. On the afternoon of August 31st, 2003, Katie's parents were preparing for a Labor Day pool party. Friends were expected any minute. Food was being set out. The house was filling with the normal noise of a holiday weekend. Then the phone rang. It was Katie's roommate. Her voice was tight, urgent. "Have you talked to Katie today?" Katie's mother immediately felt something shift. She and her daughter spoke every day, sometimes multiple times a day. But that morning she hadn't heard from her. "No," she answered. There was a pause. "We can't find her." At first it didn't seem possible. Katie was responsible. She always checked in. Her roommate had already called friends, called hospitals. No one had seen her. No one had heard from her. Katie had left the party alone the night before. Joe and the roommate had fallen asleep at the house. They assumed Katie had made it home safely. But she wasn't in her bed. Her car was still there. And no one knew where she was. Fear moves quickly when it involves your child. Katie's parents immediately told her roommate to file a missing persons report. Her father headed toward Los Cruces. Her mother tried to stay steady, tried to believe there was a simple explanation. But at almost the same time that phone call was happening, police were already at a remote dump site outside the city, standing over the body of an unidentified young woman. When detectives connected the timeline, a missing 22-year-old and a body discovered that same morning, the dread became unbearable. Katie's father was asked to come to the morgue. Hours later, he stood in a sterile room no parent should ever have to enter. When the sheet was pulled back, he saw his daughter's face. The confirmation shattered everything. There are moments in life that divide time into before and after. For the Sepich family, this was that moment. Katie wasn't missing. She had been murdered. And somewhere in Los Cruces, the person responsible was still free. The question now wasn't where Katie was. It was who had taken her and why. When detectives retraced Katie's final hours, one name kept rising to the surface. Joe Bischoff. He had been with her that night. He had argued with her, and he was one of the last people to see her alive. Witnesses from the party told police that Katie had walked in on Joe kissing another girl, his roommate's sister. The mood shifted instantly. What had been a fun reunion turned tense. Voices rose. Feelings were hurt. Katie stormed out. She left without her purse, without her phone, without her keys. Joe later admitted they had argued, but strangely, he hadn't mentioned that detail in his first interview. Detectives found that omission troubling. Why leave out something so significant? It got worse. Joe told investigators he had tried calling Katie repeatedly that night. He said he left voicemails and text messages, worried about her, but police quickly discovered something odd. Katie hadn't taken her phone with her. Joe knew that. So who exactly was he calling? Then there was his behavior after the murder. He hired a lawyer almost immediately. He refused to provide a DNA sample. He left town and returned to Gallup. He stopped cooperating. To many, it looked like guilt. Police focused heavily on him. They needed his DNA to compare with the sample found under Katie's fingernails, the skin she had clawed from her attacker. But Joe wouldn't volunteer it. Then detectives remembered something crucial. Before the party, Katie and Joe had been together in her bedroom. If they collected the bed sheets, they might recover his DNA indirectly. They rushed to secure the bedding. The lab results came back. Joe's DNA was present on the sheets, as expected. But it did not match the DNA found beneath Katie's fingernails. The sample from the killer belonged to someone else. Joe was cleared. He later explained his reluctance. He feared police would find his DNA from consensual sex and jump to the wrong conclusion. Suspicion had consumed him. Public opinion had already judged him. But he was not the killer, which meant something even more terrifying. Katie had been attacked by someone she didn't know. And that stranger was still out there. With Joe eliminated, the case felt like it had collapsed in on itself. Police had DNA from the killer, a clean sample pulled from beneath Katie's fingernails. It was solid evidence, powerful evidence. But it didn't match anyone in the system. And that meant one thing. The man who strangled Katie Sepich was still free. Investigators canvassed neighborhoods along the 1-mile stretch between the party house and Katie's home. That's when they found another chilling clue: her shoes, lying outside near her bedroom window. Footprints in the gravel suggested a struggle. Detectives pieced it together. Katie had tried to climb through her window because she'd left her keys behind. Someone approached her there. Someone offered help or forced an encounter. She fought. And she lost. Her body was then transported to the desert in what appeared to be a pickup truck. Tire tracks near the dump site supported that theory, but in a town filled with trucks, that detail narrowed nothing. Then nearly a year later, news broke from Wisconsin. A young woman in Green Bay had been attacked, sexually assaulted and set on fire, but she survived by pretending to be dead. She described 2 Hispanic men. Sketches were released. Suspects were arrested. For a moment hope surged. The crimes felt similar. The brutality matched. But when their DNA was tested against the sample in Katie's case, it wasn't a match. Another dead end. The only real hope was the DNA itself, waiting in a database for a future match. But there was a devastating obstacle. At that time, New Mexico law only allowed DNA collection after conviction, not at the moment of arrest. Katie's mother couldn't believe it. What if the killer had already been arrested for something else? What if he was sitting in jail somewhere, but no one had taken his DNA? If he gets arrested again, she was told, and if he's convicted, then maybe we'll get a match. Maybe. While the Sepich family waited for justice, the man who killed their daughter could have been walking the same streets. And they had no idea how close he really was. More than 3 years passed. 3 years of waiting. 3 years of silence. 3 years of knowing that somewhere the man who strangled Katie Sepich was living his life. Then on December 18, 2006, everything changed. A notification came from the crime lab. There was a match. The DNA found beneath Katie's fingernails, the skin she had clawed from her attacker, now had a name attached to it. Gabriel Avala. 26 years old. A career criminal. He had a history of violence, burglary, assault. He had been in and out of trouble for years, and most chilling of all, he did not know Katie. This wasn't jealousy. It wasn't revenge. It wasn't personal. It was opportunity. Detectives soon uncovered something even more disturbing. Just months after Katie's murder, Avala had broken into a home where 2 female college students lived. Armed with a knife, he intended to assault them. The women locked themselves in a bathroom and called 911. Avala was arrested for armed burglary with intent to commit sexual assault. But because of existing laws, his DNA wasn't immediately processed. He was even released on bond for a period of time before being sent back to prison. Only once he re-entered prison was his DNA formally collected. And it's sad. Tested years later. When detectives confronted Avala in prison and showed him Katie's ring recovered from his pickup truck, the wall cracked. He confessed. He said he had been out that night looking to buy drugs. He saw Katie walking alone. He offered her a ride. She refused. Later, he spotted her again, struggling to climb through her bedroom window. "Do you need help?" he asked. She said she couldn't get inside because she forgot her bag. That was when he attacked. He admitted she fought back, that she scratched him, that he strangled her and couldn't stop. Afterward, he drove her body to the desert and tried to burn it. The monster the Sepich family had feared for years finally had a face. But justice, they believed, meant more than just a conviction. In 2007, Gabriel Avala stood in a courtroom and faced the family of the woman he had taken from them. He apologized. He asked for leniency. He said he was sorry. But apologies don't restore daughters. They don't rewind mornings. They don't erase desert crime scenes. Katie's father addressed the court with quiet finality. His words were not fueled by rage, but by truth. We will never see our daughter again in this lifetime, so the man who took her life should never be allowed to walk free again. Avala was sentenced to 69 years in prison. For many families, that would be the end of the story. For the Sepich family, it was only the beginning of something bigger. During the long years of waiting for a DNA match, Katie's mother had learned something that haunted her. If DNA had been collected at the time of arrest, not conviction, her daughter's killer might have been identified sooner. He had been arrested months after the murder. He had been in the system. But no one took his DNA in time. So Katie's parents decided that no other family should have to wait the way they did. They fought for change. In 2006, New Mexico passed what became known as Katie's Law, requiring DNA collection from anyone arrested for a violent felony. The legislation passed with overwhelming support. In 2010, similar standards were adopted federally. Today, more than 30 states have versions of the law. Katie's name became more than a headline. It became protection. On Unheard Confessions, we believe stories like Katie's matter because they do more than expose evil, they create change. If this story moved you, subscribe and share it, because some confessions were never meant to stay buried. In a remote desert outside Los Cruces, someone tried to erase Katie Sepich. Instead, her name became law.